Welcome to the ISSA webinar for April 20th. Optimize your security posture by combining the power of automation with human intervention. My name is Pam Berube. I'm with ISSA International, and I will be your facilitator for today. Thank you all for joining us, but most especially, I'd really like to thank BitLyft for their generous support of this presentation. If you are not yet a member of ISSA International, please visit issa.org to learn more about the benefits of membership, and we'd love it if you'd join us. I'd like to encourage you to ask questions of our panel today. To ask a question, type your question in the questions area of your screen. And what we're going to do is collect those questions for an open Q&A segment that follows the presentation or the panel discussion, but we're also going to be interjecting them throughout. So we encourage you to ask questions right from the onset. Also, please share your insights you hear on social media, and you can do that by using the hashtag you're going to see on the bottom right corner of your slides. After today's event, the presentation slides and a recorded version of the webcast is going to be available on the ISSA web conference page. You're also going to be given the opportunity to print a viewing certificate on this webcast page on Bright Talk, and that's something you could submit for continuing education credits. I'm pleased to introduce today's moderator, Pedro Serrano. Pedro has over 35 years of experience managing and installing technical controls in networks around the world, 20 of those in military systems. He's the CISO at Grand River Dam Authority, a producer and distributor of reliable electricity from hydro, coal, gas, solar, and wind power plants. Pedro has 2 postgraduate degrees, one in telecommunications management, and the other one is in computer science. He serves as president of the Information Security System Association, ISSA, chapter in Tulsa, and holds the CISSP certification from ISC Squared. So Pedro, with that, if you'd like to begin our conference and introduce our speakers.
Absolutely. Thank you, Pam. I'm very excited about our discussion today. So today, in this session, Jason Miller, CEO and founder of BitLyft Cybersecurity, will discuss why a layer approach to cybersecurity is the best method to address advanced cyber threats and other challenges facing businesses and security leaders alike. Our topics will include breaking through confusion, really something that breaks down the types of products and services that are essential and which ones are not essential, and what percentage of your budget you should allocate to building a strong security posture within your organization. That is going to be tremendous. Also, we're going to talk about beyond EDR plus MMS. And then really simple, why do organizations need SIEM? Nothing more than a layer protection to strengthen your organization security, and how today's advanced SIEM solutions can really provide critical insight into your environment. And then the third topic that we want to talk about is this automation and people, right? And then how do they work together? We all know that with a shortage of cybersecurity professionals and high turnover, automation has become king, right? Our panel will discuss the strength of each and how they complement each other. So with that, I like to, at this point, introduce our panel. So our first panelist, Jason Miller, obviously, CEO and founder of BitLyft Security, over 20 years career in IT, focused on networks and cloud technologies with a focus on secure architecture and proactive defense strategies. He is a repeat entrepreneur as he started and found the SaaS delivery pioneer Reviora, acquired by Concerto Cloud Services in 2014. Jason founded BitLyft in 2016 and has grown the SOC AAS firm to a present position protecting SMB firms in multiple verticals across the United States. Here's the important part. Jason graduated from Embry-Riddle, yes, Aeronautical University, with a Bachelor of Science in Aeronautics, and he continues to fly when not engaged in trying to get rid of our threat actors. Our next panelist, Ken Durham, a principal consultant at Global Security Consulting Service. Ken brings more than 30 years of business, technical, and leadership experience in cybersecurity, incident response, and cyber threat intelligence. He is very active in his visionary and leadership roles with worldwide technology. Mr. Durham has a long history of innovation and high success ventures related to antivirus, incident response, forensics, and darknet internet operations. He is also proud to have served in the United States Air Force as a contractor for innovation and new training solutions for the U-2 Warthog, the Predator programs, and for pilots and navigators. Mr. Durham's also authored in 2015 an ISSA article of the year called Troubling Trends of Espionage. He has authored also multiple books and thousands of computer security articles. And then lastly, our last panelist is Kip Schroeder, Senior Solution Architect at SoftChoice. Kip is lives in San Diego with his wife in California, and he specialized in Cisco solutions. He feels most at home assisting customers with their network security challenges. Kip has been with SoftChoice since 2020, and prior to that, he worked twice for Cisco as a senior systems engineer for a total of 16 years. In between Cisco stints, Kip traveled the world for a year and spent another 2 working for a manufacturer with a global footprint. In addition to his daily employment, you can find Kip teaching network security principles as an adjunct instructor for his local community college. Bravo, sir. Through his career, progression, he has consistently gravitated towards security technology, earning his CISSP in 2005, along with a host of Cisco network and security certs along the way. Those are our 3 panelists. And then here's 4 panelists, I should say. And then as a reminder, I want to, before we start, remember to post your questions in the chat box. And with that in mind, Jason, please start us off. And let's start with the first topic, breaking through the confusion. Go ahead, sir.
Well, welcome and thank you for joining today. And I am honored to be here with all of you and these other panelists. As I have worked in this space for over 20 years now, we have a ton of clients and customers that are saying, we're confused at what is the right product, what's the right service that we should be procuring at this point. We have been doing firewalls and endpoint security and encryption and all of these items. And there is so many disparate solutions in the marketplace today that it really causes confusion. And we've even heard from folks that that we need something to help demystify this. And this is really our talk today. I want to make a couple of statements, but please don't be too brutal on me. I'm making them in general, but we're going to talk about these. And so that's why there's a panel here today. But we have a lot of folks that tell us, we're not really exactly sure where to start. We've been doing a lot of things, but we also feel like we need to hit the reset button. And so which solutions are best at working together? And it talks about there's a level of burnout that's sort of happening in the space because there are so many items that we could be going after and doing. And so we're going to talk about that in a later slide. But this slide that's in front of you is really just a actual brief synopsis of the amount of companies and logos and products and services that are in the space today. And oftentimes when a customer is looking at procuring more cybersecurity, either products and services, they sort of look at this and eyes glaze over and we're like, oh my gosh, where do we get started, right? And so we're going to talk about in this webinar why a layered approach is important and what you're going to be wanting to look at pros and cons and some of the decision-making factors that go behind these. Some of the top solutions, we feel from a panel that need to be looked at and factored in that you really can't go without today. In the cybersecurity approach and posture that you need today is going to be different than what you even had maybe 3 years ago, 5 years ago, or even 10 years ago, right? Firewalls are not just enough anymore. If you have been alive in the last 2 years, it has changed our landscape big time. So much more of the workforce is working remote from the servers and the data and the systems. And so now all of a sudden, we went to cloud SaaS offerings very fast, exponentially hockey stick curve. And what that has done for the way that everybody accesses systems, it catapulted that very quickly. So when you think about, SIEM and EDR and password management, people can no longer put their password and their usernames on sticky notes and hide them under the keyboards. That day is long gone. We now need systems that help us centralize passwords across, all of the employees and across the organization for proper sharing, right? Single sign-on and MFA, right? All these things are major components. And so as we look at this, we're actually going to want to focus in on where are you at in your today's security posture? Where are you at in your buying cycle that would help you make decisions going forward, right?
Hey, Jason.
Yes.
This is Ken here, and thanks for letting me interject. And I know we want to have a dialogue here to really kind of kick the tires in the real world. What I've seen, and I'm wondering if the other panelists have seen this as well, is that oftentimes organizations buy this tool or that tool, and maybe there's one organizational BU, like a business unit, like say threat and vulnerability management, and then there's a SecOps team that's a different layer, and then they do different spends. And part of this problem, when we look at this slide right here that I've seen, and I'd like a little validation on this, is the case, is that over time, it's like your garage. It just gets cluttered with all kinds of tools, and actually you'd be better off maybe even saving money if you did a tools rationalization or got down to the core basics. Are you seeing that as well?
I know that we oftentimes get asked, simply because we're a SOC as a service, SIEM as a service type of company, we get asked a lot, how are all of our tools doing for us? Are they bringing value? And then we try and do that tool rationalization. Do I need 5 shovels in the garage, or could we pare it down to 1 or 2, right? How many different types of rakes do we need in the garage? I like that analogy because, after years, right, the IT department continuously buys more and more and more, and security ends up with 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 different tools. But what is actually bringing value to the organization? Kip, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I do. I love that topic. Thanks, Ken, because the thing about security is that we don't know what we're missing. It's one of those things that it's easy to be able to say, I've got a tool that's covering this facet of my organization, or it's addressing these attack vectors. But how do we know which ones we're missing? And the better question, I suppose, might be, when do I deprecate a particular application? How do I, what are going to be the key characteristics? Is it just because the product's no longer being supported, or it doesn't integrate well with my existing SIEM, as you said, or any other product that we're using for a holistic, trying to simplify things? Those are the challenges I think my customers are running into, and it's a tough field to address, to get into those criteria. But you got to start somewhere. You've got to look at each one of those applications, because, as to Ken's point, they are prolific. They're everywhere, and everybody's doing their own thing. And if we're not addressing that, then it just gets worse, and you may be overlooking key areas that you shouldn't be.
Yeah, that's great. And this sort of kind of tees us up for a natural conversation into our next slide, which talks about budget. And we're not skipping too far ahead. This is still in the same vein, but as you're looking at the rationalization of tools, and you're trying to figure out, hey, which ones are bringing value, which ones aren't. The conversation of a SaaS cloud-based security solution, what's going to help you. You really want to start to look at, as you're identifying solutions and you are talking amongst your team members, do we need SIEM, and what log sources should we be pushing into the SIEM, and how much of SIEM do we need, right? Where are we going to place EDR, and on which endpoints and servers, and the password vault? Do we roll this out to everybody, or is this only a core set of a group? How are we working with single sign-on, and what is actually going to be our single sign-on source of truth? Is it going to be an internal SSO like Active Directory, or is it going to be a Amazon delivered solution or a Google Gmail delivered solution, right? And then obviously, anti-phishing, probably one of the biggest topics, globally, right? Is the anti-phishing and anti-spear phishing. So when you're looking at these and you're discussing, do we procure them, and are they a on-site solution, or are they a SaaS solution? And then what's the cost benefits of that? Ken or Kip, do you sort of want to weigh in on the approach here?
From my perspective, as I think about this particular area, one of the other challenges is, what's the best way to evaluate? Because, your previous slide highlighted in such a clear light that there are so many entities in each one of those organizational areas. So first of all, I think it comes down to, we've got to prioritize. You mentioned phishing. That still continues to be probably the most prominent and frankly the most successful as a result vector that the individuals are using to compromise our organizations and our employees' data. So how, once I've got that prioritization, how do I pilot? So
Right.
I'd love to hear a little bit, from Ken's perspective, perhaps, what the best approach to identifying which solution is going to fit best for my environment. What criteria should I, as a end, user of this particular tool, be utilizing to say that's the right one for us?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's actually a complicated answer, and there is no silver bullet to security.
Ken, I'm looking for easy here. I'm looking for that easy, buddy.
Right. Yeah. And so with that, you really need to focus in on what are your exact needs at that time, and mapping out what those requirements are. I'm a big fan of looking at three things: tactical, and then security, strategy, and then operations. What I often see are people buy these tools, fits in a box, sales guy tosses it over the fence, you install it, everything's good, right? And then you get owned. Why is that? Because somebody didn't actually have a strategy and put the orchestration together. They didn't make sure the people in the process were being followed. We'll talk more about SIEM in a little bit, but one example is SIEM is about the needle in the haystack issue. And then you have a lot of orchestration challenges when you look at the stack or the layered approach. So I really like this because there's a lot here that goes into making it effective, and you can't really cut out one single piece. You need the whole package. In this case, if you want to be secure, you got to have the whole enchilada or the whole meal. If you're missing one piece of it, that's the whole that will then get exploited, that'll lead to your compromise. So I view this as pillars or foundations, if you will, of how you would build something that's reasonably secure. And I'll just put on my counterintelligence hat for a second, being Johnny Nation State and anti-e-crime and counterterrorism. If I've got access to your email, for example, and I go to town on that, if you've got multi-factor or MFA authentication involved and it's going out to your phone, that just made it a lifetime harder for me, and it slows me down and makes it very difficult. If everything you do is an email, I will own your everything in seconds.
Yep. Yeah. Can you hit on a good point? I'm sorry, real quick here. Just that whole point of slowing them down. It's any of those factors that you mentioned that are going to add to that ability for me to be able to identify and then be able to address. So I love it. Well said.
Yeah, and Ken, I'd like to touch on. You're right that the SIEM in nature is helping you look for the needle in the haystack, right? But it's also to help stitch the logs together from all of the disparate systems. If you go back to this previous slide here, what happens is you end up getting logs from all of these, tools that you've installed into your network. And it's really difficult where you get a security analyst burnout. They're all, can you imagine? And this happens is they try and have these products all logged in throughout the day, and they're trying to have eyes and ears on what all these products are doing. And it's generating millions of logs. And so that orchestration that you mentioned is a huge pillar into helping a security analyst make decisions quickly across the log messages that are coming in from all of these disparate systems. And then, that leads into, Kip, what you mentioned, which is perfect. And we've actually had this conversation a lot with our customers, is that we're trying to identify activities, that are happening on your network pretty quickly. And the point is that you are trying to slow them down. The MFA, there's already lots of articles out there around how MFA is getting hacked, or the threat actors are trying to overturn MFA through other modes and mediums. But the mere fact that MFA, and that whether it's a text message, SMS, or it's an email or another medium, a phone call, or a token, you can slow that threat actor down. And, I think we're all in the position of, if somebody wants to get into your environment, they probably will, with enough time and talent and a big enough team. And the whole point is that we're trying to build a foundation of components here that will help slow them down and identify when they do get access to your environment, you can then do something about it quickly.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I think it'd be good for us to forward to the slide about SIEM here as we kind of explain that. But for people who don't know what SIEM is, it's taking all your logs and putting them in one spot. Let's say you've got some logging enabled, but it's hard to check it. And who looked at it recently, right? When you have a SIEM, it all comes into one spot. It starts to alert everybody. Now you have a chance to create centralized management, and more importantly, response and tuning. Like, what kind of logs and data are getting in there? Is it the right information? Is it detailed enough, or is it stupid data that's not going to help you make a decision? Mm-hmm. What I've seen today is information overload. We have so many types of technology and architecture. We're drowning in all the data that's available, and 5G is upon us. It's going to make it even worse from a drowning in data kind of world. And so it's really essential that you have somebody who knows what they're doing and can own it, whether you do it DIY or as a service. But I think that's why I see people moving into more of as a service or outsourcing this. The trend used to be, we'll do it ourselves, we'll drive high integrity. But what I saw when I managed the top 10 MSSP and SIEM provider in the world is that we're moving out to outsourcing it and as a service, because somebody needs to be super great at that one thing to connect the dots and correlate, and also come back to you and say, we need better information from you. It's not enough to give me an IP, for example, on a phishing alert. I should have the whole URL and the domain, maybe the subject and some other metadata, so I can start to make decisions. You need a trusted provider to help you do that, and you're going to have a hard time doing that on your own.
Yeah, if I could hop in there, we've heard that from our customers over and over and over again. And most of our customers actually have a security analyst or a security team that we're a liaison to. They work with us, we work with them. And that's it, is they have specifically stated, hey, we have tried to run SIEM on our own, and we're not subject matter experts, and we just can't be, because the company actually needs us to be doing other things inside of the organization as it relates to security. And so the SIEM and that SOC and being able to analyze logs and needles in the haystack, we just can't be that SME, which is sort of, I want to touch on budget real quick, and then we can come back to, this is a great conversation that we're having here on this, but so many folks have talked about, like, hey, what are others doing around budget? I've even been at some conferences over the last 5-10 years where folks are other CIOs and CISOs are sort of like sharing budgets and budget ideas back and forth, because everybody has stated to us, like, I could literally spend my whole IT budget on security and probably still not be spending enough. So Pedro, Ken, Kip, I think we've all been in a career here where we've been at multiple companies, and I'd like to share with the audience today that this 250 million gross revenue, you might say, hey, my company isn't at that level, or you could say my company's much larger than that. What we'd like you to take away from this is this is sort of some average numbers, right? If you look at this, and we have validated these data points with some public information, which is IT budgets typically end up falling around 5% of gross revenue of the company. We looked at the companies that we work for today, and we validated this information out on some public information. But then what you look at is that the actual cybersecurity budget is typically a fraction of that.
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases, we've even seen it be less than 5% of the IT budget, right? Which starts to get a little bit dangerous. But when you're looking at this, the audience members and just the folks out there that may be watching this at a later point in time, what we're trying to encourage is really assessing the budget spend that you have in security as part of the IT budget, because 5% of the overall IT budget is really not a lot. And when it goes to, we're not talking about just firewalls or some of the old mindset around, hey, the reason why we bought a firewall was purely because of security. Well, really not anymore today, right? That mindset was, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. So now today, you're buying a firewall really because you have to run an IT organization with the firewall, right? You have to have encryption and you have to have anti-malware. So this conversation is really blended between operational IT budget and security IT budget. And how do we balance that? Do you gentlemen have any thoughts on weighing in here around budget?
Yeah, you know what? I think I love your numbers there. I mean, I think that's pretty consistent. It's what I'm seeing as well, and frankly, these are kind of high in some of my customers' cases, where to them to look at that and say, yeah, 5% for my security, they're not even willing to commit to that. So it gets back to an educational stance where we need to help, accentuate the value that these security solutions are bringing. But again, when you look at that original slide that you presented that showed the plethora of options out there, that's an overwhelming ask. So it's got to be really targeted, and then they've got to be very specific. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult for them to sell it upstream, if you will, to justify that increased budget. So I think there needs to be a lot of discussion on that side of things too, how best to communicate these without, utilizing scare tactics and other approaches that typically don't go very far.
Yeah, that's well stated. I completely agree with that, Kip and Jason. The other thing I see here is there's a couple of other challenges around budget. You have bifurcation of different business units and managers, and the web and flow of politics that play in there. And it's complicated on how that takes place. It's really a cultural challenge. So part of what needs to happen is how do we really communicate value? And what I've seen traditionally is the IT people are not that great at communicating risk as opposed to getting stuff to work, right?
Mm-hmm.
So make sure you start to address that culturally, introduce that and look at that. But the other component is there's this business side of it, the operations side, that again, traditionally speaking, geeks are not that great at. And if you look at the operational side of it, if you have all these different tools, say you've got 5 tools for your patching and risk reporting, and maybe we've got an incident we need to look at or something in our logs, how many of those tools actually do what you need? How comprehensive you are? Maybe if you got rid of 3 of those tools, and then you bought one of them that was really awesome, that kind of a tools rationalization, we do those all the time because we work a lot in Fortune 1000, as you know, and they're just, it's a cluster of things. It's that garage problem. They actually save money and have better outcomes and are more effective and more efficient. So if you don't have budget, there's more than one way to improve and mature, even without changing the bottom line. But also make sure you're addressing that cultural component, or you'll never get anywhere long term.
Can I say a couple of words?
Yeah.
I love this idea that you guys were talking about earlier about the pillars of security. And it's funny because as I'm listening to you, I'm like, wait a minute, this is now the pillars of business. Your comment about you must have a firewall, it's that's not a security thing anymore. It is a business process. So it really changed my thinking process, because now the budget really gets reallocated to business. So for our audience, that may be a great idea, because you might be able to say, hey, we might be able to shift some of this content into the business side versus it's all about cyber, it's all about cyber, it's all about cyber. So let's continue, please.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had a couple of questions come in here, and we just want to address them before we get too far along. So some thoughts around like SIEM versus like just standard log management, and when you should have log management, when you should have SIEM, and how that even plays into SOAR. I'm going to try and address that a little bit. So that actually plays in, those questions were perfect because it falls into our next slide here. So, and they were real questions from a real person. So, SIEM today is extremely important. Log management, however you want to sort of categorize it or frame it up in your own words, it's extremely important no matter what size organization you are. I can't stress that enough. Where Ken is working with like Fortune 1000 size companies, you might say, well, that's great for them because they can afford it, right? And the same thing with Kip. But what we're seeing is that SIEM and log management is extremely important across all size companies, even SMBs, where you might only have 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 people working at a company. That's where like SIEM as a service and SOC as a service can help a company that size get the scale that they need, but yet still have a critical tool. Now, just doing log management and holding logs in a central place can have some pros and cons. It's a pro that you're actually just doing that and that you're holding the logs in a central spot. But however, the con of that is that if you don't have either someone or some process or system analyzing those logs on the fly in real time, you could have a threat actor in your environment on your network starting to take over control of systems, and you may not realize it for weeks or months later. So,
hey, Jason.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we call that the dwell time, and the dwell time is still a staggering 9+ months.
Yes.
I've already projected what the threats will be for next year because I see the threatscape now, and it's horrible. So what you're talking about is really about scalability and efficacy and efficiency. So to do threat detection and response well on top of that log system, you have to be fast because it's happening at real time. And there's no way you'll get through all the data in a sustainable, scalable way. There's even a small organization will have millions of data points on the network and endpoints and all the other devices in a single day. So there's no way to do it scalably in a log system. End of story. It's not even a discussion. You have to have a tool that takes it to the next level, or a service, or both.
Yeah, that's a great point. The important points here that you really want to take away as an audience member, and we see this, is that ability to look across the entire environment within minutes, right? Logs coming in from all of those disparate systems, firewalls, switches, endpoints, your SaaS solutions. How are your users and the employees interacting with the VPN and the SaaS solutions? What's happening there, right? Kip, I don't know if you want to maybe go into any thoughts around that. Leave it open for you.
Yeah, no, I think you're hitting on it well. I don't have anything additional to add right at this point. I do have other points that are going to add a little bit later on, but I think you're covering this part nice.
Perfect. And one thing that I wanted to highlight here is the bullet point around allowing you to make evidence-based decisions. So Ken actually said this, which was as IT folks, I've been an IT engineer. You know, I started out in my early days, that was my career. And it was always very difficult for me as an IT engineer to go and like get money from the people that held the purse strings, right? And I had a hard time articulating why we needed something other than it was like cool, or, you know, it helped me do my job better, or I felt like the organization needed the tool, but communicating that. Some of these tools that we're helping you focus in on, you know, the SIEM, SOC as a service, and helping you have subject matter expertise coming alongside of you, it will allow you to make the evidence-based decisions, not only for your budget, but also that tool rationale. Maybe a tool that you bought last year, the year before, is really not providing you the evidence, the posture that you need, and it's really not producing the security that you need in your organization. So you could remove that from your budget and maybe use those dollars somewhere else.
Jason, I think that that's a huge point right there. I appreciate you bringing that up, because you know, evidence it's in the eyes of the beholder, right? So
Yeah.
you've got to set that baseline before introducing the new tool, so that you can validate that, yeah, that was a good investment, and yes, you all did the right thing in bringing that into our organization. But it's also a matter of not just doing it one time. It's got to be a consistent, you know, metric that you're communicating in a way that's consumable by the recipients. So if you're looking at executives, they're not going to want all the names and the technical details associated with that particular vulnerability that you help to, you know, prevent creating havoc in your organization. They're going to want, you know, higher level. So, you know, the SIEM tools or the other tools that we're using, they've got to be providing that type of consumable data for those decision makers that have control over the budget.
I couldn't agree more.
That's a really good point on that. In fact, we have a question here that rolls up into this around vulnerability management, and how does that really roll up into SIEM and all of that. So you have a lot of logs. Let's say you're looking at who logs into your external services on your external facing architecture and infrastructure. And then you might have logs around your vulnerability scanners and what they've detected inside of your organization. All of those roll up into a SIEM collectively or holistically, your visibility into where might there be an event or an incident or something you need to look at for that needle haystack type solve. But when we look at vulnerability management, that's really a subset of that. That's looking at your software layer primarily and saying, where do we have a known vulnerability or an issue that might require a patch, a workaround, or remediation of some type? And that's one of the key areas that we see in SIEM and SOAR, right? You've got vulnerability scanners that are doing their business and letting you know where the problems might be. That rolls up into the SIEM. The SIEM allows you to correlate it to, we see this stuff happening on several machines, or there's something that might be related to this vulnerability, like say Log4j that came out this year that was really big. And Log4j was complicated. It was integrated into lots of levels. So security isn't easy, and there's different levels. I look at vulnerability management as a core level of best practices, and SIEM is a way to make it manageable. And then from there, you have to start to make some strategic decisions. Hopefully that'll answer the question. If you have any more, feel free to ask. And we have several more questions coming in, so good job in interacting, everyone. We'll get to those soon.
Yeah, we appreciate the questions. We would much rather have questions to talk through here than just present you know, material today. So I did advance the slides, and I think that what we're touching on here is extremely important. So how that SIEM, and Ken, you nailed it on the vulnerability. We even see that with all of our customers is that we have the vulnerability management and those vulnerability scanning tools tied into the SIEM that we have deployed for our customers. And the moment that they have any questions, or that we might be doing some threat research in their environment, we're using that vulnerability tool data along with data around the asset, whether it's a server or an endpoint, to figure out what known vulnerabilities are on that machine, and then also what might be an unknown vulnerability, but there's still some poking and prodding that's happening to that server or to that endpoint that they might be trying to get at. What port is it? What activity is happening? Is it a PowerShell, or is it some other type of script that's trying to exploit something on the machine? So,
hey, Jason, On that front, when you start talking about the scanning, are you just doing passive scans as part of where you have found success, or you have agents that are available on the endpoints reporting in, or a combination of both? Where have you found the most success to counter these risks?
Yeah, so we really encourage, if possible, an agent to be on the machine.
Yeah,
It is the best way to get the most in-depth information on the
concur.
endpoints and servers.
Yeah.
If you can't get that, then yes, a passive solution is the next best thing. But if you can get an agent on there, that's really awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, on that note, I'll just piggyback that to say that we saw a movement about 5 years ago towards the endpoint in general. And of course, agent is one way to do that. But if you don't already have in your stack some kind of EDR, MEDR, or something that lives on the endpoint, so if the threat gets past, say, email, like a ransomware threat or something, and it tries to execute, you need something that's more detailed and actionable right there. And ideally, it needs to have really strong, robust integration into a SIEM, as well as potentially the ability to take evasive action automatically. And that's why EDR or MEDR has really exploded in the last 5 years, because we know the viruses and the malware are going to get through in some cases. And sometimes MEDR can stop it instead of leveling your network.
Yep. So that's extremely important to know. What we're talking to you today is about the SIEM and the SOAR and some sort of central threat intelligence. I think all organizations today probably have some sort of threat intelligence that they rely on, right? MDR is sort of that high level category. Almost all MDR offerings today have SIEM, have some sort of SOAR in there, some sort of central threat intelligence. EDR is also part of that offering, endpoint detection and response. But that MDR, if anybody is wondering what MDR is, it's managed detection and response. It's where a SOC team is using these tools that we're talking about and sort of executing for you on your behalf. Now, one of the reasons why SOAR is so important in this, or security orchestration and automated response, is because you might be one or two people, right? And then you have a SOC team that's helping you. But still, today there's about 460,000 job openings in the security space alone. It is one of the top employment that actually has a negative unemployment rate. There's not enough cybersecurity professionals or people to go around for all of the job openings today, which makes orchestration and automation so important. Now, I would agree with Ken here, which means that you can't have garbage in and garbage out. So you have to have good quality logs in that are parsed correctly and hitting on alarms and alerts correctly. And all of that takes a professional. But once you know that you have good, clean data in, then you can have good, clean data actions or remediations tied to that. So it's extremely important to have orchestration and automation response platform, but making sure that the system is set up correctly is really important there.
Yeah, we do have a question here, Jason, on SIEM and SOAR, and it's a great question. I love it. Is SOAR, this whole automated correlation reporting thing, replacing SIEM? And that's an interesting question, and there's a tension there. You could also throw in threat intelligence platforms, which sometimes sell themselves as a SOAR as well. But there's this idea that you get everything centralized, you can do some correlation and automation in the SIEM world. In my very strong opinion, the only way to be super great at this is to have an awesome foundation of SIEM, and then on top of it, you would add on like a really good pie that mom made up for the holidays. You're going to have some awesome whipped cream, and that's your SOAR. And the reason why is because that adds in another layer of orchestration, ticketing, workflow, other business and operational components. But if you've got a garbage SIEM, or you're not very good at your SIEM, or you don't do a good job of what we call tuning, you're never going to be good at SOAR. And too many people buy SOAR thinking it's a magic bullet, or I can just replace it, when they didn't do a good job with SIEM and they fall flat on their face. So you have to do SIEM awesome, and then you can move on to SOAR. I really think you should be doing both, and they should be developmental. Like if you didn't pass 101, you don't get to go to the 201 courses. kinds of things. And I like this slide because it's one of the few that I relate to since I specialize in cyber threat intelligence. That's another layer on top of it.
Yes.
If you don't have those other things, please don't try CTI until you've got some foundations in place with SIEM and THOR.
Yeah.
And I'll add to that too, Ken, just the whole idea of, yeah, we've got to have the SIEM. However, we also need the tools that can report into that. I mean, as mentioned, right? Garbage in and we're going to get garbage out. And not every tool is compliant with every SIEM and vice versa, right? So we want to make sure if the customer is married to a particular, security product and or endpoint detection tool, we want to find particular SIEMs that are going to augment that and utilize that data in a far superior way than others. So that's part of the evaluation process too. So we want to make sure that foundation is solid and the data that we're, consuming is going to be utilized.
Yeah. No, that's great. And continue to bring in your questions. I know that there's more questions rolling in, and we're going to try and address those. We also going to try and stay within time here. So we want to be respectful of your time that you have with us today. In doing so, yes.
There is one quick question that might be good to hammer out here, which is, how does SIEM and THOR apply in a new architectural world where there's no boundaries, everybody's at home? It's not your traditional castle moat thing like from last century.
Yeah, I love that question. I saw
Yeah, that's good.
And if I could take just a moment and kind of share some thoughts on that. We have several customers that when the pandemic hit and they made some decisions, they decided to actually move out of their physical real estate offices, their commercial space. And from there on out, all of their employees were going to work at home. And, which I thought was like sort of a bold move without a lot of time to assess. But what it's actually done is that they have moved a lot of their systems from the physical on-site premises, on-premise configurations to AWS and Google and Azure and those types of places. And what has happened is it's allowed them to actually have a better security posture than what they had previously back on-prem. And the reason why I say that is because just take, for instance, a lot of the Amazon Web Services tools and the way that they've architected their systems, they have actually been able to build in security into the tools. So as you set up tools, it's security built-in mindset. And the logs that come from those tools are typically well integrated with SIEM and THOR.
Yep.
And it allows you to speak back to through an API for the SOAR functionality and remediate issues and problems very quickly. So that's my 2 cents briefly. Ken or Kip?
Yeah, that's good. You hit on the head, right? Those service providers, those cloud providers do have excellent security tools. Many times they're not being utilized. That's one of the things that our company does. We do provide those assessments for our customers to ensure they're maximizing that investment. But you still have the endpoint, right? And we still got to have a way for that endpoint to be, reporting and providing the telemetry info that's valuable from a security perspective into a centralized SIEM. So I think that's a part of that question as well, and those do all play together.
Yeah,
being mindful of time, I'll just quickly anchor and state that with the massive migration and transformation to the new architectures and cloud and hybrid in particular, 2 things are happening. You're not making that transformation in a year like you thought you did. What you've got now is a mess on your hands. You've got the old legacy, type of route switch network, and now you've got the new cloud that may or may not have security, and you probably don't have visibility over there. So what you really need to do is go in and do an assessment, make sure you're looking at things, bring in some third-party advisory, get a lay of the land with where you've landed post-pandemic.
Yeah, and the other thing that I would say here is a lot of our clients have moved away from these static VPN situations. And I know that this is pretty down in the weeds and tactical, but a lot of our customers have rethought about the endpoint. And if they are connecting to SaaS solutions all day long, a customer, a lot of our customers are saying, I am willing to actually lose an endpoint as long as it doesn't have a static VPN connection to, where we host many of our servers or other systems. And so I'm willing to lose that endpoint and replace it in conjunction with, before that endpoint was sitting on a local area network and had access to the rest of the endpoints and maybe even the servers. So again, it sort of helped enhance the way that they've thought about, an endpoint before. So with that, we put together some questions. The panel had put together some questions that we really wanted to leave you with as you're thinking about coming off of this webinar, and maybe some things that you wanted as takeaways to go back and talk with your team, or maybe your other executives with, is, do you have these policies and procedures in place that would help spur good conversations, right? Do you have the security awareness training program for your staff, or are you utilizing kind of a third party outside organization to help, right? Are you doing any sort of consistently auditing of configurations? And both Ken and Kip actually touched on this a little bit around, what are your configurations of your systems, and how often are you looking at this to make sure that they're insured? Like last week or week before or last month, person X, made these configuration changes on the fly in the moment. Did anybody go back and check, were they put into a good state, sort of peer review of configurations? Number 4 is a big one, and this might cause some contention. We've had a lot of conversations with this, but it's the removal of local admin rights from endpoints and servers. Almost every customer of ours has asked us this question. Ken or Kip, do you guys want to weigh in on number 4 and maybe even to number 5 from your perspective?
Yeah, number 4, that's a tricky one, because there are so many individuals within the organization that claim exception to that administrative privilege and need it and or want it. And sometimes it's legit, sometimes it's not. It's a policy. So, but I concur. That's a huge point of vulnerability, and it is a great way to counter any of those risks of an endpoint that's now isolated, out on the edge of the network and or remote. Bringing that within some form of control, at least giving a little bit more of a measure of control against that. So I think that's a really valid policy, and we've got to find ways to help sell that into the organization, because changing it when you've given them all the rights in the world and now taking away, those constrict, those rights, it's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, and I'll just briefly mention that this is in the area of what we call identity and access management, or IAM. And this is a complex solve. You've probably heard of things like zero trust architecture, and it's more of a concept than a solve, but these concepts really get difficult and challenging on the tactical layer, right? So here's what I will tell you. If I have access to admin and you've got access to everything, and it's common across all network segments and various consoles, as soon as I get your credentials, or I run a tool like Mimikatz, I will own your everything in seconds, literally seconds. And I even have tools where I can take each one of your admins down and then the rest of your network in that order. And I've handled those cases. So it's essentially, you have a multi-layered solution in place to really manage the risk. That's a complicated answer, and you should do it in the short term. Like, what do I need to do right now to take care of my immediate risk? But also, what do I need to do to start to transform towards a zero trust architecture?
Yeah. That's great that you actually bring up Mimikatz. Is we've seen a number of clients that before they met us, had issues with Mimikatz getting installed, and then it's undetected, and then it rolls into logging a whole bunch of information that they're inputting on the machine, and then it sends it out. That could be a whole nother webinar alone that we could do, and that would be fun to discuss. But it leads into this 5th bullet point, which is, are you monitoring your security logs? And specifically, we see a lot of sort of issues out in the Office 365 space, but that same argument could be made for many other technologies. So what I want to do is just emphasize that question. If you're not logging or monitoring those security logs in Office 365 into like a SIEM, and looking for that behavior, I would really highly recommend it. phishing and account compromise is extremely important, and it's happening all over the place. As we sort of look to wrap up, I'm going to hand it back over to Pedro and field any sort of last minute questions that we didn't get to yet.
Absolutely, thank you. Hey, it's a great conversation. There is one question that I really want you guys to weigh in, and it's this issue of cost. Specifically, cyber costs or impacts are in the upward trend. And as a tool to help CISOs capture more dollars for the cyber budgets, how do we convince the C-suite to literally make our budgets bigger? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think the first thing that we need to have with the C-suites around is expressing to them the risk. If we don't spend ample amount of dollars on cybersecurity, what would happen if the company is shut down for days or weeks because of a ransomware event? Or what would happen if our data is exfiltrated outside of the organization? This needs to be a conversation that's happening at every organization. Hours need to be taken each month to discuss this, because what we've seen is that it happens on the fly. When a cyber attack hits and all of a sudden the organization is halted, and then that revenue that the company was generating is now at risk, right? And oftentimes the cyber liability insurance does not cover, all of that revenue, right, that potentially could be being missed.
Yeah, I'd recommend too that you identify the key stakeholders that are involved at every level, from leadership down to tactical. And what is it that resonates with them that they get today? And then what do you have in your organization that you can specifically message intentionally towards them? And as you do that, you're trying to build a case for return on investment or value to that individual. And you need to move all the way up to thinking numbers and metrics and cost, calculating productivity, loss of reputation, look what happened to our competitors. These are all good things. It's a complex solve. I'd recommend some virtual CISO services and things around that to help you craft that case so you can be successful in your go-to-market, internal as well as external.
Yeah, and there's nothing like finding a peer organization that has similar, characteristics, and even one that has been compromised in some way and it has done damage to that organization. That just cups miles, and it resonates far more. So I think that's important.
Yeah, and I would even just mention there, your SOC as a service or your SIEM as a service, whoever your service provider is, really should be able to help you with this. Again, evidence-based decisions, and to be able to follow up with what is the risk if we don't do these things, and here's what you're doing and here's what you're not doing, and give you some sort of level of confidence that's going to help you move forward and communicate that to the rest of the organization.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Hey, this has been a fantastic conversation. I made notes because there's some great nuggets in here of information. We are literally out of time. I do want to thank the speakers for you guys for your presentation, and then I want to pass this over back to Pam so she can give us some final thoughts. Go ahead, Pam.
Great. Thank you so much. It was wonderful, very interactive. I think it was just the ticket. Thanks everyone for joining us today. And Jason and BitLyft, thank you again for your generous support of the presentation. So much valuable information in there. As a reminder, after the event today, you'll be able to obtain the presentation slides and a recorded version of the webcast. That's going to be available on the ISSA web conference page. And I would also like to remind you that you'd be able to print a viewing certificate on this webcast page on Bright Talk. And that's something you'll be able to submit for continuing education credits, your CPEs, CEUs, in accordance with the various certifying bodies. Should you have any questions, please contact us at memberservices@issa.org. You are also invited to join us April 27th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for our next webinar, where our topic will be supply chain cyber risks and security strategies. Thank you again for joining us and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.